Bandeham Shri Guru Shri Yatha Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sabadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Paran Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishikam Vitamscha Om Jnana Timaranda Shagyana Jana Shalakaya Shakshuram Tamyena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namo Gaurva Bhistam Supurakam Gurugana Rasisha Sambhushitam Chintya Chintya Samasta Veda Nipunam Shri Rupa Patanugam Govinda Vidam Ujwalam Bharatanum Bhaktyan Vidam Sundaram Vande Vishwagurun Cha Divyat Bhagavad Prem Noi Bija Pradam Devam Divyatanam Suchanda Baranam Balarka Shailanshitam Sandrananda Puram Sadeka Varanam Vairagya Vidyamburim Sri Siddhanta Nidhim Subhakti Lasitam Saraswatanam Baram Vanditam Shubharam Malika Sharanam Nyashishwara Sridharam Vanshakopatarubyascha Kripa Sindhubhyavacha Patitanam Pavanibhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namah Namo Mahabaranyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namane Gauratavishe Namo. So reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita, the hidden treasure of the sweet absolute, with translation and commentary by Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Dev-Goswami Maharaj, also translated from Bengali and Sanskrit by Sripad Bhakti Ananda Sagar. This is chapter 18, Moksha-yoga, the path of liberation, and we're on verse number 29. Buddhar Vedam Dritesh Jaiva Gunatas Trividam Shrinu Prochamanam Asheshena Pritakvena Dhananjaya Buddhar Vedam Dritesh Jaiva Gunatas Trividam Shrinu Prochamanam Asheshena Pritakvena Dhananjaya. O Dhananjaya, now listen attentively. I shall clearly describe the three types of intelligence and determination according to the modes of nature. O Dhananjaya, now listen attentively. I shall clearly describe the three types of intelligence and determination according to the modes of nature. Pravrittim sha nivrittim sha karya karye maya maye bandham moksham chaya beti buddhi sa partha satviki pravrittim sha nivrittim sha karya karye maya maye bandham moksham chaya beti buddhi sa partha satviki. O Partha, intelligence of the nature of goodness is that which can distinguish virtuous engagement and abstinence from vice, duty and non-duty, danger and safety, and bondage and liberation. So, O Partha, intelligence of the nature of goodness is that which can distinguish virtuous engagement and abstinence from vice. So, you can distinguish virtuous engagement from vice and engage in virtuous engagement and avoid vice. In other words, abstain from it. Then duty and non-duty. That person of the nature of goodness can distinguish what is one's true duty and what action one doesn't correspond to what one doesn't need to do. Can distinguish between danger and safety. That action which will put one in danger, or one will be all right performing that action, will be in safety. And bondage and liberation. Person can see which actions will lead to bondage and which actions will lead to liberation. That is of the nature of goodness, to be able to distinguish like that. Then Yaya dharmam adharmam sha karyam shakaryam evacha ayatavad prajanati buddhisa partha rajasi. O Partha, intelligence of the nature of passion is that which causes an erroneous perception of religion, irreligion, duty, and non-duty. O Partha, intelligence of the nature of passion is that which causes an erroneous perception of religion, irreligion, duty, and non-duty. Because that's basically, first of all, as far as religion and irreligion, we often comment that Krishna consciousness in one sense is not a religion, although it is the natural engagement of the soul, and especially the soul engaged in the eternal service of the Lord, that would normally, by most criteria, would be considered religion. When talking about serving God, they would consider that to be an aspect of religion. But we say it actually isn't, in the sense that we are more concerned with what we call Daivi, or Sanatana Dharma, and that will be the divine Dharma, the engagement of the soul. And we're saying that that's the natural quality of the soul. It doesn't have anything to do with formal precepts of religion. But normally people, they will be very much controlled, or their actions will be based on what their conception of their religion or their religious duties are. And often that is very wrongly conceived. We see people that commit atrocious actions, activities in the name of religion, when really, if one understood that the nature of real engagement of the soul isn't based on some religious dogma, but it is where rather one should be guided by a spiritual master in the scriptures, and that will give some indication. So even if somebody says, well, the Bhagavad Gita is happening on the battlefield, so wouldn't that be about, engagement in warfare, etc.? We would say no. That's the situation in which Arjuna is. But the Bhagavad Gita is not advocating just unrestrained religious battles or anything, whatever name they're being done. And so, and we often see that, and when it comes to people engaging in even violence in the name of religion, there's always people on the other side that are also engaging in violence in the name of their religion. So that is not, so here it says, O part, the intelligence of the nature of passion is that which causes an erroneous perception of religion, irreligion, duty, and non-duty. So all those things can be artificially assigned or thought of in terms of religious dogma. But we're not interested in religious dogma. We are interested in the natural activities of the soul in relationship to the Lord. And rather our perception is one of distributing to others the chanting of the holy name, which is a perfect activity for one's advancement in spiritual life. So we're doing that. We do that in the form of Sankirtan, would be said of congregational chanting of the holy name. We do that in many places, and then of course also literature, which we're reading and distributing, and people feel that their lives are changed, bettered, for the better by coming in contact with it. So, but here in the case of the mode of nature of passion, one cannot distinguish between, and you got to understand why. becoming very passionate, mode of passion. An erroneous perception of religion, irreligion, duty, and non-duty. And adharmam dharmam itiya, adharmam dharmam itiya, manyate tamasavrita, sarvartan viparitamscha, buddhisa parthatamasi, adharmam dharmam itiya, manyate tamasavrita, sarvartam viparitamscha, buddhisa parthatamasi. Intelligence of the nature of ignorance is covered by illusion, whereby vice is considered virtue, and everything is taken to be the opposite of the reality. So intelligence of the nature of ignorance is covered by illusion, whereby vice is considered virtue, and everything is taken to be the opposite of the reality. So we can see that in general, people are acting under these modes of nature. They have this kind of intelligence. And sometimes they may be acting in the mode of intelligence, in the mode of goodness, but that is not a permanent state of mentality or consciousness. And then they may go down to the mode of passion or the mode of ignorance, and then their reality, their perception of reality may become completely distorted. And we see that people, they go through many different phases. In the course of one day, their intelligence may change in so many different change in relation to so many different situations. So what can you say? And then when you add to that the fact that many people, they're given misinformation. They're not told what is actual information. Certainly they're not told about the nature of the soul and engagement of the soul. They don't get that kind of information ever. Unless they meet a devotee of the Lord, then they may hear. But normally they won't hear anything of that, and then whatever they're told, whatever they hear, even if they're lied to, they will take that to be the truth. It may be the total opposite of what is the truth, but they will still continue in their actions based on wrong criteria. So these definitions of intelligence in the mode of goodness, passion, and ignorance, we can see how sometimes people are acting nobly, and sometimes they're given wrong information, they're acting very wrongly, or they'll come to wrong conclusions. So this is the nature of being in a world where everything is under the control of intelligence perverted by the modes of, in particular, passion and ignorance. But even the mode of goodness, there is some wrong perception, because you could say, oh, well, how can there be wrong perception in the mode of goodness? Because that's not spiritual perception. And besides that, in this material world, the modes are always modes of nature. The mode of passion and ignorance sometimes overtakes the mode of goodness. So one's perception of reality is incorrect, and you don't really have as it says here, intelligence of the nature of ignorance is covered by illusion, whereby vice is considered virtue, and everything is taken to be the opposite of the reality. Dritya yaya darayate mana pranendriya kriya yogena vyabhicharinya dritisa parthasatviki. Dritya yaya darayate mana prasendriya kriya yogena vyabhicharinya dritisa parthasatviki. O Partha, determination of the nature of goodness is that determination which unfailingly and with single-minded concentration controls the functions of the mind, the life airs, and the senses. Uparta, determination of the nature of goodness, is that determination which unfailingly and with single-minded concentration controls the functions of the mind, the life airs, and the senses. Part, the determination of the nature of goodness is that determination which unfailingly and with single-minded concentration controls the functions of the mind, the life airs, and the senses. So we may say that that determination of the nature of goodness, which is based on intelligence, because your intelligence is supposed to be, and this is the mode of goodness, your intelligence is supposed to be able to control the functions of your mind and life air and the senses, especially the mind and senses. You should be able to control that with your intelligence, and that will come from, actually, as we said, when Maharaj Yudhishthira said about Dharma Buddhi. He spoke about Dharma Buddhi, that intelligence which was guided by a sense of what is real Dharma. Now I spoke of Sanatan Dharma. Sanatan Dharma is engagement in devotional service. That is Sanatan Dharma. It's the natural quality of the soul, Jiver Swarup Oy Nitya Krishna Das. That the soul is the eternal, Nitya Krishna Das, is the eternal servant of Krishna. So that's the nature of the soul. So Dharma Buddhi, that proper intelligence, will give one control over the mind, the senses. Life airs also. Here we had Avadut Maharaj here today talking about controlling the flow of the life air. So, determination. And that's mentioned in, as I said, in the Upadeshamrita. Utsahan nischaya daryat tat tat karma pravardana. Abhicharinya dritya, then unwavering determination. Utsahan nischaya daryat. Enthusiasm. Utsahan nischaya daryat. Daryat here. Here it says daryate. Utsahan, enthusiasm, determination. Utsahan nischaya daryat tat tat karma pravardana. Utsahan, enthusiasm, determination, and patience. So we have to have this determination. How one will be able to succeed in any kind of endeavor without proper determination. And as is mentioned here, the word comes up, driti. Dritvi. Let's see. Abhyabhicharinya. Vyavasayatmika buddhi. Abhyabhicharinya. With single-minded concentration. Has to be able to focus your concentration. If you can do that, then you'll be in control of your success in life. Otherwise, if you don't have that single-minded determination and focus, then as it's described, your senses will be splayed everywhere. Each sense will be looking to connect with the object of the senses. And then how can you have any determination? How can you have any purpose in life? So part of determination of the nature of goodness is that determination which unfailingly and with single-minded concentration single-minded concentration controls the functions of the mind, the life airs, and the senses. Abhyabhicharinya charinya dritya, unwavering determination. Yaya tu dharma kamartan drityas dharayate Arjuna rasangena falakankshi dritisa Partha Rajasi. O Partha, O Arjuna, determination of the nature of passion is that fruitive, attached determination which adheres to religiosity for the purpose of amassing wealth to fulfill mundane desires. O Partha, O Arjuna, determination of the nature of passion is that fruit of attached determination which adheres to the religiosity, adheres to religiosity for the purpose of amassing wealth to fulfill mundane desires. So you can see that the normal goals that people have of life, even if they're following the Vedas, is dharma, artha, kama. Dharma means they're following religiosity, or, they're, what is that religiosity? That is dharma, artha, which will lead to accumulating wealth. Dharma, artha, and why is one following some guidance to enable one to be successful in accumulating wealth? People, actually, they'll follow religious commandments or like that. They'll follow the Vedas also for the idea that they won't be performing wrong actions which will lead to them being punished and not being able to amass wealth. So they'll be able to acquire wealth. And why? Dharma, artha, because then dharma, artha, kama. Because then they can have wealth. They're following their religion to accumulate wealth so that they can have some enjoyment. Dharma, artha, kama. Kama means that's the basis of enjoyment. Kam, or lust, is the basis for having some lust on some level or other. It's the basis for people accumulating money so they can enjoy. Okay, well, they'll go out and spend their money on their enjoyment. So, O Partha, O Arjuna, determination of the nature of passion is that fruit of attached determination which adheres to religiosity for the purpose of amassing wealth to fulfill mundane desires. Dharma, artha, and kama. But Mahaprabhu says, na dhanam, na janam, na sundarim kavitam va jagadishai kamaye mama janmani janmanishvare bhavatad bhaktir ahaitukitvaye. That I don't want wealth, na dhanam, na janam. I don't want fame or followers, na janam, na sundarim. Nor do I, this is a symbol for fulfilling mundane desires. Na sundarim means a beautiful wife. I don't want wealth, I don't want fame and followers, nor do I want to have even a beautiful wife, or someone's very old, or they would call it a trophy wife, right? But Mahaprabhu, he took sannyas when he was 24. And he did have, before he took sannyas, he did have a beautiful wife. But he says, this wife is like the goddess of, like Lakshmi Devi, in this case Vishnu Priya, but she's both Lakshmi, his first wife who passed away, and Vishnu Priya, they were both like the goddess of fortune, very beautiful. So Mahaprabhu says, I don't want wealth, I don't want followers or fame. So wealth, it means artha, and nadanam, janam, followers is related with dharma, religiosity, where one may be famous as a religious teacher and he has followers. Nadanam, najanam, and sundarim means that I don't want a beautiful wife. I'm not looking for enjoyment as the focus of my life. Nadanam, najanam, nasundarim, kavitam vajagadaishaya kamaye. Mama janmani janmanishwari bhavatad bhakti rahaitu tvai. Nor do I want liberation. The only thing I want in my life is your service. And not just this life, birth after birth. So that's goes here. Oparto Arjuna, determination of the nature of passion is that fruit of attached determination which adheres to religiosity for the purpose of amassing wealth to fulfill mundane desires. But Mahaprabhu says clearly, I don't want these things. I'm not desirous of any of these things, neither wealth or religiosity for the purpose of acquiring money. I'm not following religion for that goal, and I'm not interested in becoming rich, and I'm not interested in just amassing wealth so they can have enjoyment. I'm not interested in even the enjoyment, nor do I even care about, liberation or so-called norms of salvation. I'm not interested in that. I'm just interested in serving you, my Lord, birth after birth. So Mahaprabhu is giving a good example why we don't want these things. And then Vishayendriya samyogad yattad agrem ritopamam pariname visham iva tatsukam rajasam smritam Vijayendriya samyogad yattad agrim ritopamam pariname vishamiva tatsukam rajasam smritam. Oh, did I skip some verses? Yeah. I skipped over these verses. So, as the book is going, I turned the page because this was verse 34 at the end of the page, so now I want to read 35, but 35 is not on the next page, it's here, so I started to read 38, so I want to read 35. Yaya swapnam vayam shokam vishadam madamevacha savimunchati Durmeda driti sa tamasi mata yaya swapnam vayam shokam vishadam madamevacha navimun chati durmeda driti sa tamasi mata. Determination of the nature of ignorance is that by which a foolish person does not give up sleep, fear, sorrow, depression, and arrogance. Determination of the nature of ignorance is that by which a foolish person does not give up sleep, sleeps too much, fear, very fearful, sorrow, feeling always depressed, sad, and arrogance. Determination of the nature of ignorance is that by which a foolish person does not give up sleep, fear, sorrow, depression, and arrogance. Now, actually, I've been told that sleep is one of the symptoms of depression. People who are depressed, they sleep extra. But ignorance, being in the modes of ignorance, also leads to all these symptoms: fear, sorrow, depression, and arrogance. Although the person is sleeping too much is fearful, very sorrowful, sad, depressed, but at the same time managing to be arrogant. That is of the nature of ignorance. Persons in the mode of ignorance, they have these qualities. Arjuna is called Udakesha. He is conqueror. He's a conqueror of sleep. Arjuna. But here, a person is described by Krishna being in the mode of ignorance, who sleeps too much, who is fearful, sorrowful, depressed, and arrogant. Those are the quality of the nature of ignorance. Can't give up sleep. Sukham tvidanim trividam shrinu me bharatarshava abhyasad ramate yatra dukantam cha nigachati yattad agre vishamiva parinamem ritopamam tatsukam satvikam proktam atma buddhi prasadajam Sukham tvidanim trividam shrinu me bharatarshava abhyasad ramate yatra dukantam cha nigachati yattad agre vishamiva parinamem ritopamam tatsukam satvikam proktam atma buddhi prasadajam. O Bharatarshava, now hear from me about the three kinds of happiness, that state in which one is joyful through his practices while attaining the cessation of all unhappiness, and which in the beginning is like poison, but ultimately like nectar, and which is born of the purity of self-realization. That happiness is said to be of the nature of goodness. This is the quality of this verse. We remember this, hearing this verse from the very first days when we are coming to Krishna consciousness. We've heard this verse, and it's very reassuring. Actually, a very nice verse. It says, "O Bharatarshava," which is best of the Bharatas. Best of the Bharatas. Arjuna, he's the best of the Bharatas. O Bharatarshava, now hear from me about the three kinds of happiness. That state in which one is joyful through his practices while attaining the cessation of all unhappiness, and which in the beginning is like poison, but ultimately like nectar, and which is born of the purity of self-realization. That happiness is said to be of the nature of goodness. So what we remember from hearing from the very beginning about attaining not just attaining of the cessation of all unhappiness and joyfulness, but also which in the beginning is like poison, but ultimately like nectar. So, in other words, the indication of saying it's like poison in the beginning, but like nectar in the nectar, means that with one's continual engagement in devotional service, regardless of what it's like in the beginning, whether it's like poison or not, by one's engagement in devotional service, one's happiness increases. One becomes progressively more happy in devotional service. So one may think in the beginning that these activities seem strange, that the activity that I used to think when I heard about Krishna consciousness, and then I was engaged in Krishna consciousness, and I was told that, we're spreading this everywhere to everyone. And then it seems like we're bringing other people to Krishna consciousness so that they can be what? Basically, I was thinking, so that they can become monks. That they can become monks. That was my perception, because I wasn't a grihastha. I didn't have family and a house and someone cooking meals and all these other things. So my perception was a lot. We're preaching, especially in the beginning of the mission, when everybody was really focused upon, even the grihasthas lived in the temples, and they were like this brahmacharis and sannyasis also. So it seemed like we were producing a society of monks. So I was wondering, how is that? And will that necessarily lead to everyone's happiness? Because in the beginning, one is engaged in, you might say, some arduous activities. One is engaged in activities for serving the Lord, but it's not actually necessarily coming spontaneously to one. I even once asked Srila Prabhupada that how, when he was going to the West, he would spend most of the time in India, but then he would go for 5 months to the West. And I said, and I was a new person, I said, how can I understand I have a relationship with you when you're gone to the other side of the world, and here I am in the pot room washing pots. So I was, so in the beginning one may not have so much a clear perception of what is devotional service. And Srila Prabhupada said that it wasn't my activity to wash pots, it was his activity, because he's responsible for maintaining the mission all over the world and all the temples. So he said, so it's actually my responsibility that even the pots are washed. So then he said, but I may ask you to help me. So he answered in a very clear way, a humble way. The spiritual master is guiding the disciple. But we can understand that for someone new, there may be so many different activities that one learns and that are not necessarily thought of as being natural. So some things may become a little arduous, a little bit hard to engage in the beginning. People are, their life in Krishna consciousness, as you can say, that Mahaprabhu sometimes, he'd appreciate the value of those persons who were engaged in chanting, dancing, and performing devotional service, and leaving aside the normal enjoyments and vices of this material world. So in the beginning we may not be used to that, but here it's mentioned that state in which one is joyful through his practices. So his practices do lead to enjoyment, while attaining the cessation of all unhappiness, and which is in the beginning is like poison, but ultimately like nectar, which is born of the purity of self-realization. That happiness is said to be of the nature of goodness. And we can also say that is the nature of Krishna consciousness. Whatever difficulties may be there in the beginning, they will ultimately lead to unending happiness. And that can be experienced. I'm not doubtful of that at all. And I believe that is Anandam Buddhi Vardhanam. I really believe that Mahaprabhu is leading us to that state of unceasing happiness. Okay. This fall, maybe I never had it on. Did I have it on?
Yeah, because otherwise somebody would have said there was no sound.
What?
Yeah, because I think otherwise it would say like we can't hear.
Well, I don't know that I had it on, or maybe. I don't think so. Did you put it here?
Yeah.
Oh, that's where it was.
Well, nobody said they couldn't hear anything.
Well, it was capable of picking up. Okay. So I'll read Text 38 and 39. Vishayendriya samyogad yattad agram ritopamam pariname vishamiva tatsukam rajasam smritam. Vishayendriya samyogad yattad agram ritopamam pariname vishamiva tatsukam rajasam smritam. That happiness which is born of the contact of the senses with their objects, and which is like nectar in the beginning but poison in the end, is said to be happiness of the nature of passion. That happiness which is born of the contact of the senses with their objects, and which is like nectar in the beginning but poison in the end, is said to be happiness of the nature of passion. So it's opposite of what we previously heard in the previous verse. That state in which one is joyful through one's practices while attaining the cessation of all unhappiness, and which in the beginning is like poison, but ultimately like nectar, and which is born of the purity of self-realization, that happiness is said to be of the nature of goodness. So then it is like poison in the beginning, but nectar in the end. As one continues, even with whatever tasks one's doing to advance in one's own personal realization and satisfaction. That may be difficult in the beginning, may seem beyond one's capabilities, but it in the beginning is very difficult and like poison, but in the end, is like nectar. That is happiness in the mode of goodness. And the happiness in the mode of passion is quite different in the sense that it's born of the contact of the senses with their object, and which is like nectar in the beginning, but poison in the end, is said to be happiness of the nature of passion. So in the very beginning of one's passionate life in this world, then one may think that what one is experiencing through sense enjoyment is like nectar. But as one grows older and one finds that the entanglement and just the fact one is growing older, it's no longer like nectar, it's becoming like poison. And so, in the beginning of one's life, when one is enjoying and one thinks that this is like nectar. And I see even, it is natural. Many of the younger devotees, they join, or they are born in families of devotees, and I've heard many persons, they're in the temples, and at the same time, they're thinking that they should not be there, that they want to be going out and enjoying this world. So because they're thinking that this is like nectar, but then that enjoyment in this material world doesn't always lead to continued happiness. It leads to unhappiness, and it becomes actually that unhappiness can increase because there's actually no real enjoyment in this mundane world. It's like temporary enjoyment. But in the beginning, it may seem very, very prominent. This is what I want to work for. This is what I want to achieve. I want to achieve money. I want to buy everything that's on my list of desired objects. I want to be able to attain that. And then that seems very nice. But at the end, one is not satisfied like that. And Srila Maharaj said that there was one man, when Srila Maharaj was going to take sannyas in an early age, one man advised against that and said, you haven't experienced this world, you haven't experienced this life, you should do that first. You should experience that. And then, after you've experienced that, then you can take sannyas, but not now. And Srila Maharaj said he did proceed and took sannyas, but he saw with that man that man's life became more and more entangled in his family members, like his son, who had attained some big position, was disgraced. Something led to his disgrace, maybe involved involvement in some wrong activities that became publicized and fell from a position of respect to disrespect. And that person who advised Guru Maharaj in that way, Srila Maharaj, that person experienced so many calamities and problems in his own life that later he came to Srila Maharaj and he told him, you were right. One doesn't have to go through all this suffering to come to the point of being engaged in spiritual activities. It's not necessary to go through that suffering in order to be able to engage in devotional life. And so that person was a practical example of how so many things may appear to be like nectar in the beginning, but then can lead to being like poison, actually poison, suffering, that it's not necessary to experience things. One should be able to hear about this and believe this, and then one can understand. But sometimes we see persons that are young, they don't think like that. They think, oh, let me first enjoy this world. And there was even an example where one person heard the preaching of the devotees, and that person was young, and he went to the mutt, and there were some older persons there at the mutt, staying at the mutt, and they advised him, what are you doing here? You're young. You shouldn't be coming to the mutt. You should, great preaching. You shouldn't be coming to the mutt. You still have your life to experience. When you get old like us, then you can come here. But that's the opposite of really what our philosophy is. Prahlad Maharaj says, from the very beginning of one's life, from the tender ages of childhood, one should engage in devotional service. Not necessary to experience that in the end things start to go bad. That's not. So, yad agre chanu bandecha sukam mohanam atmana nidralasya pramodatam tamasam udaritam. That happiness which is self-deception, from beginning to end, and which arises from sleep, laziness, and illusion is called happiness of the nature of ignorance. So, we heard of that happiness which is in the nature of goodness that may be even poisonous or like poison or distasteful in the beginning. Why do I have to do that? No. But in the end is like nectar, leads to one's greatest happiness. That's good in the mode of goodness. That happiness which in the beginning is like nectar, but in the end is like poison. That's happiness in the mode of passion. But here it says that happiness which is self-deception from beginning to end. From the beginning to the end, it's all bad. It's self-deception. One is in illusion. One is cheating oneself, which is self-deception from beginning to end, and which arises from sleep, laziness, and illusion. It's called happiness of the nature of ignorance. So that's the nature of happiness in the mode of ignorance. It's all based on 100% delusion. It's not even seasoned with the mode of passion, where there'll be some perception of nectar, but that is just based on it's in the mode of ignorance from beginning to end, and it's all based on sleep, laziness, illusion. In other words, that one has no conception, no idea of what reality is. And you can see that because Srila Maharaj, the first book that was produced by Bhakti Sudhir Goswami Maharaj, is called Search for Sri Krishna, reality, the beautiful. So that Krishna consciousness vision of reality based on serving the Lord, serving Krishna, search for Sri Krishna, reality, the beautiful. That is reality and it's beautiful. But normally, what is people's conception or misconception of reality? They'll tell you, oh, you have to wake up and smell the coffee or smell the tea leaves, whatever it is, you know. It's smell the coffee, right? Or read the tea leaves, I think. But they're saying, in other words, they're saying that someone who has some happy existence, maybe engaged in devotional service, they think that that person is not in touch with reality because he has not experienced the cruelty and the reality of how harsh this world can be. So rather than think that reality is beautiful, and I would say that reality is beautiful in relation with Krishna consciousness, it's beautiful. But the so-called reality, which is based on sleep, laziness, and illusion, that happiness which is self-deception from beginning to end, based on self-deception, because what is reality the ugly? That's self-deception. Really, one should be able to come to the conclusion that reality is beautiful. Or as we heard, reality is dancing. Reality is dancing. Krishna, Mahaprabhu is dancing. And he's dancing in ecstasy and spreading the chanting of the holy name. So that's reality, the beautiful. Reality, the ugly. Reality is, that's what people ultimately think, that someone who's in a Pollyanna state of existence, who's happy, they think that person is an illusion, and when they wake up from the illusion, they'll realize how this world is, in their words, dog eat dog. That's, as if we're eating dogs. That happiness which is self-deception from beginning to end, and which arises from sleep, laziness, and illusion, is called happiness in the nature of ignorance. So this is where I'll end for today. I'll sing Hari Haraya. Hariharaya Namah Krishna Jaravaya Namah Jaravaya Madhavaya Keshavaya Namah Gopal Govinda Ram Shri Madhusudan Giridhari Gopinatha Marana Mohan Sri Chaitanya Nityananda Sri Advaita Chandra Garadara Sri Vasari Gora Bhakta Vrinda Jai Rupa Sanatan Bhakta Raghuna Sri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasa Raghuna Echai Gosai Kori Charana Bandhan Jaite Vignana Shamista Puran Echai Gosai Jarmui Taradas Tasabar Padarenu Mora Panchagras Tader Charana Sevi Bhakta Sanibas Janame Janame Hoy E Abhilas Echai Gosai Jabe Brache Koilabas Radha Krishna Nitya Lila Korila Prakash Anande Bolo Hari Bhaja Vrindavan Shri Guru Vaishnava Pade Manjai Aman Shri Guru Vaishnava Pad Padma Koryan Harinam Sankirtana Kohe Naratamudas Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare 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 Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare 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 Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Nitai Gora Haribo, 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 Haribo. Nitai Gora Haribo, 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 Haribo. Jai Saparikara Shishi Guru Guranga Gandharvika Giridhari Ju Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parabhajaka Charyashta Tara Sada Shri Srimad Srila Bhakti Sundar Govinda Dev-Goswami Maharaj ki jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Paravaja Kachari Ashta Tara Sadasi Shimad. Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Dev-Goswami Maharaj ki jai. Jai Bhagavan Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Thakur ki jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj ki jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Satchidananda Bhakti Vinod Thakur ki jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Vaishnava Sarvabhauma Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj ki jai. Rupanuga Guru Varga ki jai. Namachari Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai. Shri Rupa Sanatana Bhatta Raghunashi Jiva Gopal Bhatta Dasha Raghunath Shad Goswami Prabhu ki jai. Premsigo Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Shri Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Srila Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami Prabhu ki jai. Srila Vrindavan Das Thakur ki jai. Shri Narottam Srinivas Shyamananda Prabhu ki jai. Vishvavaranya Srila Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada ki jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Bhakti Nirmalacharya Maharaj ki jai. Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mat Acharya Vrinda ki jai. Ananda Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Shri Navadip Dham ki jai, Shri Dham Mayapur ki jai, Saparshada Shri Nityananda Prabhu ki jai, Saparshada Shri Mahaprabhu ki jai, Shri Koladvip ki jai, Shri Chaitanya Saraswat Mat ki jai, Soquel Shri Chaitanya Saraswat Seva Ashram ki jai, Shri Radha Krishna Go Gopi Govardhan, Shamakunda Radhakunda Kalindi Yamuna Jo ki jai, Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, all the assembled devotees ki jai, Gaur Premanande, Hari Hari Bol.
Jai Mr. Pavan, ki jai.